Hello, welcome to Revenant Reads. I'm Vin, and these are the E and F book tags. So these book tags were created by Jim's Books, Reading and Stuff. I was tagged to do the E tag, at least by Mark over at Book Time with Elvis. And just like I did the A and B tag and the C and D tag together, I figured I would just do these two tags together. They're quick enough, and especially with the E tag, a lot of these questions I can't even answer. And he has a disclaimer in the beginning that feel free to answer which ones you want. You do not have to answer all of them, and that is good. Thank you for putting that disclaimer in, Jim. So with the E tag first, he says, E is for Ernest. What is the importance of being Hemingway? That wasn't a true prompt, just a little joke, uh, which is good because I actually haven't read Ernest Hemingway yet. E is for Elephant. What is the biggest book you have read this year? That would be Musashi by Eiji Yoshikawa, the historical fiction originally written in the 1930s about Miyamoto Musashi, the very famous uh, samurai. Um, and the English translation that I read was about 1,000 pages, and that was abridged. So definitely the biggest book that I read this year so far. E is for ebooks. Do you prefer physical books or ebooks? By default, because I don't really have much experience with ebooks, I'm going to say physical books. I'm not opposed to ebooks, but I don't have an e-reader. I don't really like reading off of my computer, so if I had a nice Kindle or something, maybe I would not mind it at all. But at this point, I do like physical books. I'd like to be able to track my progress. I like the physical interaction with the books, and I especially love having them on the shelves. To be able to see them and experience them, and maybe by some kind of miasma, take in whatever they have in them. Of course, that's not true, but it always feels that way when you're in a room full of books. So physical just by default, really. E is for exploration. What is your favorite travel book? I do. I love to travel. I've read some travel books, not tons, but my favorite travel writer is the late Tony Horwitz. I think Mark actually said something about one of his favorite travel books being Blue Latitudes from Tony Horwitz. And that's one of the ones that I haven't read yet. But I had read Confederates in the Attic, Baghdad Without a Map, and my favorite one of his I read might actually be A Voyage Long and Strange. Uh, yeah, he passed away, unfortunately, just a few years ago of a heart attack, and it was a terrible loss. I loved his mix of it was history and travel writing and journalism, and he would he does the same kind of thing in here that he did in Confederates in the Attic, where he looked at the Civil War memory, especially in the South. And here it's more about I think in the beginning he talks about going to Plymouth Rock and and realizing that that was in the early 1600s. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, that was in the early 1600s. But Columbus had landed in the New World, originally the Bahamas, in 1492, and he knew very little at all of what happened in between those two periods. So this is about him traveling through all the way from Canada down through the U.S. I think he goes to the Caribbean as well, to find out what happened in the years in between, and of course, talking about the things that he's seeing today. And his stuff is just incredibly insightful. It's fun. It's funny often, and terrible loss as far as I'm concerned that he's not with us anymore. But this one, so far, of all the ones that I've read, this one might actually be my favorite one. Next book, E is for Elf. What is your favorite fantasy creature? Mark, again, on his answers, he put vampires, and pretty much in agreement. My channel is called Revenant Reads. I like revenants. I like the the kind of the horror trope or motif of the dead returning to the living. Um, also as ghosts as well, but generally returning in a malevolent sense to the living, often as very rude awakenings and harsh reminders that the past doesn't stay dead, and that the present needs to contend with it. Maybe I'll make a video one day talking more about revenants and vampires and ghosts and all why I like that stuff. But yes, that is my favorite type of fantasy creature, and I love horror films that deal with that sort of stuff. E is for extraterrestrial. What is your favorite book about another world or your favorite planet, real or fictitious? I don't know if I read a lot of Star Trek novels, so I love the sense of adventure and exploration and discovery that Star Trek has with it. So any one of those I enjoy reading about. Real planets, Saturn is certainly beautiful. I love learning about any of them, especially like some of Jupiter's moons, like Europa. Even there could be possibly life on that satellite. My favorite book, though, really, and again, I'm overlapping with Mark a lot. He said Carl Sagan's Cosmos. I'm gonna choose Carl Sagan, but I'm gonna say Pale Blue Dot. My favorite planet, ultimately, being Earth. The title of this comes from Sagan was part of the Voyager mission. Those probes that were sent out in the late 70s to come into close contact with Jupiter and Saturn and take pictures. And as Voyager was, I think it was leaving Saturn's, going past Saturn, Sagan decided, or he convinced the team, to turn the camera around and take one last picture of Earth, because that was the last time that Voyager would be able to see Earth. And they have this kind of, it ends up being an amazing image, the way that he ends up describing it. Earth is just one single blue pixel inside a shaft of light, like a mote of dust. That's it. That's all that Earth is in that picture. And that's before, Voyager gets beyond being able to see Earth at all. And he writes something very powerful about that little pixel, that little mote of dust suspended in space. And I'll just share that here. I think it's worth it. It's a little bit of a longer passage, but I think it explains especially why the Earth is my favorite, and why Sagan is one of my favorite science writers. So if you'll indulge me for a second. Look again at that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, and everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived here, on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. Excuse me. The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors, so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe, are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. The Earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate. Visit, yes. Settle, not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the earth is where we make our stand. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another, and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known. So, I don't know if you could put it better than Sagan. I know I couldn't, but favorite planet? That pale blue dot that we are continuously screwing up. Going on. E is for Exodus. What's the most interesting book you have read about an Exodus? This was hard to figure out what I would consider an interesting book about this. I have not read books that deal exclusively with an Exodus, other than the Bible. I have books that kind of mention or deal indirectly with different Exoduses. Or is that the plural? I don't know. One that kind of stuck out to me, though, when I was looking at my bookshelves, is this one. Man, Child in the Promised Land by Claude Brown. Originally published in 1965. This is the autobiography of a man who grew up in Harlem in the 1940s and 50s. And that is at the end, his being in Harlem is a result of this great migration that happened with Native Americans leaving, not Native Americans, sorry, African Americans leaving the American South and moving to northern cities. So it's a kind of a mass exodus from the South, mostly due to the intense systematic institutional racism. And he talks a lot about how it was difficult for his family to adjust from rural southern customs to a now northern urban environment, such as getting incredibly drunk on the weekend and having fistfights. That's something they did a lot in the South. But when you do that in a northern city, it gets way more dangerous. And of course, he had the experience also of hard drugs coming into Harlem, especially in the 1950s. So he not only, he's a man-child in the promised land in this. So, the North Harlem was supposed to be the promised land for African Americans after their exodus from the American South. It doesn't end up being that. Harlem in the 1920s was a vibrant place for the so-called Harlem Renaissance, a artistic outpouring of African American culture. Then, unfortunately, is hit very hard during the Great Depression, and is starting to recover now in the last, maybe 20 years, but it was rough for a long time. And he kind of chronicles how that came to be throughout the 1940s and 50s. And of course, he is one who gets out of Harlem, and he ends up doing very well for himself. So he kind of had his own exodus in a certain way. But this is the one that kind of came to mind when I thought about an interesting book dealing with an exodus. One book, or an exodus that I would like to read more about, that I haven't gotten a book for yet, is one that we don't often think of as an exodus, and that is when the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, and you also have the Frisians and some other tribes, when they started to invade / settle in Britain, when the Roman Empire was receding, was pulling back from Britain. And it's an exodus in a way because the Huns at that time were taking over Eastern Europe, and that was pushing tribes and people to northern Germany into putting pressure on what is today Denmark. The Angles, the Saxons, the Jutes, those tribes, they didn't leave to go to Britain just to try and make a fortune. They kind of left by necessity. They were being pushed out. They were running out of room. So that was a mass exodus. They were going somewhere where there was a newer opportunity for them. I think there might have also been something with shore erosion or something as well. I don't know if I'm remembering that wrong. But that is an exodus that I am certainly interested in learning more about. And that is the Etag. All right, so we are moving on to the F tag. We'll see if I can answer more of these questions. The first one, F is for France. Who is your favorite French author? I haven't read enough French authors, I hate to admit, certainly Dumas, and some of the major ones I have not read yet. One that I have read is Jules Verne, and I really like Jules Verne. I love 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I've read, I don't know, maybe half a dozen of his stuff, but I really like Jules Verne, so I'm going to stick with that as my favorite French author. F is for fiction. Approximately what percentage of reading is fiction? Of your reading is fiction? This is why I can't answer too many of these questions. I'd say maybe 20% of my reading is fiction. Although last month I read 6 books and only one of them was fiction, so it's even less than 20%. So for many years I didn't read any fiction. In the last few years I've devoted myself to reading more fiction, but it's still not at all the primary reading that I do. I mostly gravitate towards nonfiction. So it's not a lot. That's why when very often book tags are geared towards fiction readers, I have a much harder time answering those questions. But I'm slowly building up my, my library of fiction and going through it. F is for fantasy. Who is your favorite fantasy author? I have to say Robert E. Howard. I like his sensibility. I love Conan. It's one of my favorite fantasy characters. It's very Nietzschean in a certain way, certainly, but it's also very American. I often contrast Conan by Robert E. Howard with like Tolkien, where Robert E. Howard kind of has an American disdain for royalty in a certain way. Conan does end up becoming king, but he does it by his own hand. He's not given a crown. He's not inheriting any of these things. It's like a blood-soaked Horatio Alger story. There's one kind of there's one poem line. I don't know exactly how to characterize it, but I always loved it. I remember reading this as a kid and just being like, this is one of the greatest things I've ever read, but it's always stuck with me. And this is Conan. I think it was just kind of a rhyming verse that he had in there, but it's what do I know of cultured ways, the guilt, the craft, and the lie? I, who was born in a naked sun and bred in the open sky, the subtle tongue, the sophist guile, they fail when the broadswords sing. Russian and die, dogs. I was a man before I was a king. That's the kind of reason. That's the thing. I know I messed up reading that, but that's why I like Howard. That sort of sensibility. F is for 5 stars. How many books have been 5-star reads for you this year? Not many. I still don't exactly know what I think of as a 5-star read. If it's fiction or even if it's not fiction, the writing has to be great as well as what I'm reading, the content, and I don't often find that. Close to it, I really enjoyed Perfume, which I read last month, the Patrick Ziskin novel, translated from German. I thought the writing and the story were really good. Is that 5 stars? I don't know. I don't think of them necessarily in that way. I was really glad to read The Wanderer's Havamal by Jackson Crawford. It's a translation, but I just had so much fun with it. It felt like 5 stars to me just because I had a lot of fun with it. So anyway, not a great answer. That's what I got for that. F is for funny. Funny has two meanings. What book do you find both peculiar and funny? Haha. So I have a hard time answering these kind of questions too, but I've brought this up before in another tag. But Ambrose Bierce's The Devil's Dictionary. I mean, it's peculiar in that people think, if you know anything about this, it has nothing to do with Satan. This is more cynical satire. And he just goes through and he gives us definitions of words, but they are so marked with satirical wit. I find it hilarious. To me, this is like the ultimate bathroom reader. But it's bitingly true in a lot of ways. And it's peculiar because he would just go ahead and do something like this. I mean, this is a peculiar thing to do. Peculiar exercise, I would say. And a lot had to have gone into this. This had to be incredibly difficult. But You know, and it's just funny. It's just really, I definitely recommend people pick this up. This is just like, you know, like, okay, cabbage. It says, a familiar kitchen garden vegetable about as large and wise as a man's head. Um, you know, I just love these sorts of things. Anyway, I'm not going to go reading it. I've read enough during this video. But this is my answer. Devil's Dictionary. F is for Fight Club and film adaptation. What book and film adaptation both merited 5 stars in your opinion? This is another one that, again, I haven't read a lot of fiction, so it's not like I've read tons of 5-star fiction as far as I'm concerned. Generally, I find that the books that aren't great make better movies, and books that are amazing, movies sometimes fall short. So to find an incredible book, an incredible movie, I'm not sure that I found that combination. There's certainly books and movies that I like The Exorcist, Rosemary's Baby, you know, certain horror books. But I don't know if I'd call like the books 5 stars. I probably wouldn't, even if I think the movies are. So I don't know. I mean, earlier this year I read 12 Years a Slave, the memoir of somebody who, Solomon Northup, who was captured, an African-American male from the North who was forcibly put into slavery in the South for 12 years, as the title suggests. Is that a 5-star book? I mean, I don't know. It's a memoir. I think it's very powerful, but it was made into an excellent adaptation, an excellent movie. So I don't know. This is a difficult one for me to really answer. F is for Frida. There's a chance to show off your furry friends, and I'll insert some footage for that. Asher. Hey, Shelby. And Lily. Shelby. F is for Flower. What is the last book you read with the name of a flower in the title? And that would be The Poppy War by R.F. Kwang or Kwong. I'm not entirely sure how to say her name. And finally, F is for Flash Fiction. What are your thoughts or experiences of this medium? I haven't read a lot of it, but I did write some of it in high school, and it was fun to write. It was more like a punchline, you know, kind of bring the reader somewhere towards the end, that, you know, a little bit of a twist. I enjoyed writing it, but I don't have a lot of experience in reading it. So that is it. Those are my answers for the E and F book tags. Once again, thanks to Jim from Jim's Books, Reading and Stuff for creating these. And that's it. I guess I'll be back at some point for the next couple letters. All right. Thank you, BookTube.